Joining us is Adrian Twiga, Head of Resources Development at the University. Adrian, over to you for a few words.
All right, thanks so much. First, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. We appreciate you taking your time to share this webinar with us. And thanks to Telfed for hosting it together. We appreciate the partnership. I know that today I'm the least interesting person available, so I'll try to be short and to the point. Firstly, Ariel University became a full-fledged university in 2012. In the last 8 years, we've already run full guns ahead, becoming a world-leading research university. Amongst other projects, including Dr. Drori's wonderful project he'll talk about soon, we now are recognized having the world's leading center for compact particle accelerators, doing fantastic research into cancer treatment. We also, last year, people might have seen the news, we opened Israel's newest medical school, the Dr. Meristem Sheldon G. Adelson Medical School, which we had an intake of 70 students last year and another 70 this year. We had 900 students apply, to give you an idea of the drastic need for studies here. We are the only country in the OECD that has a majority of our doctors studying overseas and not in their country of origin. So that's a very important school. Ariel in general is dedicated to being number one in whatever we do. And that means we generally try to find what's missing, what's needed in Israel, and close that gap. As you heard, Dr. Drori's center is the only full wine research center in Israel, one of the few in the world, which is truly bringing a taste of the traditional Israeli Judean wines to the tables of people. And of course, anybody who wants to partner with us and help us to bring this fantastic project to the tables of people around the world are welcome to get our details through Telfed. And we're happy to welcome you to our campus, raise a glass, and discuss what can be done in this wonderful, wonderful project. So with that, I'll hand it to Dr. Drori.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry for my English before we start. It's not my native tongue, as most of you probably can hear from my accent.
Dr. Drori, one moment, if I may. I do want to introduce you officially, but before we do that, I want to introduce you all to Aviva Tal-Or. She is from the Telfed. She deals with volunteerism and community events. She will also be running today's Zoom event. If you have any issues, she's the person to contact via chat. Aviva will wave up to us, and if anybody has an issue, please be in touch with Aviva. Before we start, Aviva would like to say a few words about Telfed.
Thank you, Teddy. Thank you to Ariel University for this wonderful partnership. Adrian, I hear a very familiar accent. It's great to have this partnership today. Thank you to Dr. Drori for your time. And if I may, just a 2-minute introduction about Telfed, the organization that is hosting this event today. So with your permission, I'll share my screen. Okay, Telfed is our nickname. Our full name is the South African Zionist Federation. Started in 1948. And I'll just go through a few of our activities. What does Telfed do? So what is Telfed's mission? To promote the quality of life of Southern Africans and Australians in Israel, and to support their participation in and contribution to Israeli society. And just a few of the things that Telfed does. We have 540 annual scholarships that we give out to students, 290 volunteers countrywide. If you're interested in becoming a volunteer and getting involved, please be in touch with me. We have a full-time employment advisor, counseling, seminars, mentors. So if you need anything in that department, again, please be in touch. If any of these apply to you, please be in touch. We have about 85 events per year. That's also my department, about 5,000 participants. Of course, since Corona, we've moved all of our events online, and it's very exciting to have you all join us with online events. We have a magazine that comes out 3-4 times a year. If you are not receiving the magazine, again, please let us know. We'd love to have you involved. We have a website. newsletter that goes out once a month, our Facebook page. If you're not already following us on Facebook, please give us a like and stay in touch. 105 rental apartments. Telfed is the only Ole organization that gives the option of rental apartments that the rent is 30% below the market value. We have 2 buildings in Tel Aviv and 1 in Ra'anana. We have 120 lone soldiers, okay, Australian and South African lone soldiers who we take care of. We have social events, all sorts of things that we do to help the lone soldiers. We have Klita. We welcome many Southern African as well as Australian Olim per year and help them with their Klita and their absorption into Israeli society. And then the last thing I wanted to speak about is the financial assistance. Telfed provides financial assistance and as well as emergency relief, but we help over 400 families per month. So if anyone is looking for a place to make their donations, please remember Telfed, and all of the donations do go to needy Olim. So thank you once again. Thank you to Dr. Drori. Thank you to Adrian and Ariel University. And Teddy will introduce Dr. Drori. And thank you, everybody. Enjoy the event.
Thank you for that, Aviva. Again, I'll just remind you, if during the event you do have a question or something, a chat, use the Zoom chat. At the end of the event, we will open the again, and you'll be welcome to ask your questions in person. So please all take your seats and sit down to enjoy this morning's event. Welcome to you all. My name is Teddy Saitovitz, and I'm a volunteer at the Telfed. Dr. Elyashiv Drori has a BSc and PhD from the Faculty of Agriculture at the Hebrew University. He's currently head of the Eastern R&D Center and also works at the Department of Chemical Engineering and Biotechnology at Ariel University. His research interests are in the field of grape genomics, enology, and wine technologies. One of his leading projects is the collection and characterization of the local Israeli grapevine populations and matching archaeobotanical grape remains with the newfound grape varieties. The project is indeed a lifetime one, aimed towards the renewal of wine practices from the local Israel varieties used in the Holy Land during ancient times. His research group is involved in grapevine genomics, domestication studies, enological studies, and their technology development. Dr. Drori.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I will now share the screen so we can see my PowerPoint presentation. Okay, just a minute. So a few words about myself. So my name is Elyashiv or Shivi Drori. I'm a faculty member at the Department of Chemical Engineering, Biotechnology, and Materials at Ariel University, and I'm the head of the agricultural department at the Eastern R&D Center in Ariel. I have one wife, Baruch Hashem, 6 kids, actually 2 grandchildren. This is not updated. 1 dog, 3 degrees, 2 wineries, and the Chad Elokeinu. So this is me in very, very short terms. The 2 wineries we're speaking about is the Research Winery at Ariel University and Gvaot Winery, in which I'm acting as a winemaker, an active winemaker every year, including this very long harvest of this year. In the last few years, we started founding the Samson Family Wine and Research Center. This beautiful building is starting to be built. It will include a research winery at its basement and a lot of research labs and visiting center. So that would be hopefully up in about 2 years. And at that time, you could actually come and visit and see and hear about the whole story of the wine research in ancient times and in modern times. So what are the aims of this research center, which is unique in Israel? It's actually the only one of its kind. So we want to actually produce very high impact viticulture and enology research to advance the specific knowledge for improvement of Israel's wine industry. Well, Israeli wines are actually quite great now, but they can become even greater. So that's a very important aim. Lead the advancement in wine tech in Israel. Wine tech is actually quite a new concept because the wine industry is traditional, and it has been very traditional for so many years, for thousands of years now. Putting tech into wine is a new concept, and it's becoming really, really strong. So we want to do actually to be part of its advancement in Israel. To lead the research of ancient winemaking in the Holy Land. We will be talking about that a lot today. And this is something that we are doing uniquely in Israel. So if you look at this picture, this beautiful scene of ancient time, day-by-day life, they actually grew grapevines and made wines all around Israel. But most importantly, the steps, the slopes of the mountains were used for planting grapes. They used every bit of the land. And as you can see, and my wife is always laughing when she sees this picture, the women are still working and the guys are dancing. That did not change in many thousands of years. But to be serious, they actually grew the grapes at the vineyards, and the vineyard itself contained a wine press. And the wine press was not in a industrial zone like today. It was inside the vineyard, and the grapes were transferred very short distance from the vineyard, and were pressed in the wine press, taken by clay jars to be fermented in cooler places. We find many ancient wine presses around Israel, thousands of them. This is an example for an archaeological excavation I was part of in a remote forest where 8 unique structured wine presses were found. This is a very interesting spot on the way to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem in ancient times, and it's a big question why 8 big wine presses are concentrated in such a small place. Maybe it was something of the kingdom. This is an interesting question to be dealt with in the future. This is another very ancient wine press dating to the Second Temple time. You can see here a few different wine pools in the big pressing area. So indeed, we can see very different technologies in different areas, from very primitive ones to more sophisticated ones, including more compartments to produce the wines. Just a minute. So what caused the wine grape varieties disappearance? This is a big question. What actually we know today is that when we started coming back to Israel, the land of Israel as pioneers 150 years ago, people around here did not produce a lot of wine. The natives, the Arab natives, and also the Jewish and Christian natives did not produce a lot of wines. And the wines were produced from very few local grape varieties. And it's quite possible that the reason for the destruction of the huge wine industry that was around Israel for so many thousands of years is due to these guys. These are the Mameluks. This is a Mameluk rider. And these were very zealot Muslims that occupied the whole region around the 13th century. And they were so harsh in their prohibition of wine consumption that they actually destroyed the wineries or the wine presses in order to prevent wine production in big amounts. They only allowed very small amount of wine production for sacramental purposes for the Christians and the Jews who paid big taxes for that. So the wine industry actually deteriorated from that time on, and that is probably the reason for the loss of many wine grapes, and the remaining ones are actually mostly table grapes. So this is what we believe caused the change in the profile of grape varieties we can find in Israel today. When Baron Rothschild started to renew the Israeli wine industry at the end of the 19th century, he sent his specialists to Israel, and they looked around to see what is actually available in means of vineyards. And they saw that the local vineyards are in a very poor condition, and in a big mix of many different local varieties. Some are table grapes, some might be used as wine grapes. And they decided to recommend that the whole wine industry in Israel will be based on new varieties, modern varieties coming from France, like Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Chardonnay, and so on. And they actually decided to neglect all of the local varieties, and the whole new wine industry, which was a beautiful one and still exists until today, is based on the modern European varieties. So what is the problem with that? Actually, it could be very nice. What's the problem with having just modern varieties? So the answer is this: if we want to have a glass of real Israeli wine, most wine countries in the world actually have their traditional varieties. And this is a very important part of their wine DNA, their story, their ethos. If you want to produce the story, which is a very important part of the wine industry, you have to have your connection, a very strong one, and to your ancient methods, your history, your culture. So having said that, you can understand that Israel, as a very, very ancient nation and country, it loses a lot of its potential as a wine country when it just grows these modern grape varieties. So we decided, it's about 8 years ago now, to try and solve this problem by finding some of the lost varieties that were lost during history, recognizing the wine varieties out of these, trying to find that they are actually able to produce wines in standards of modern countries, and finding, finally, and trying to close the circle and to find which of these varieties were used in ancient times, which is a very important part in convincing the customer, or first the wineries, that these varieties are indeed not just ones that are found today in Israel, but ones that were actually used in ancient times to produce the wines. And I will, of course, detail and emphasize every part of this long journey. So, in what we decided to start with is actually to build a national grape collection. The first thing was to actually collect traditional varieties that are still grown by mostly by the Arab population, some Druze populations in the north, and put them into the collection. This is the first step. The second step is to actually collect feral grapevines from the wilds, and these are actually divided into two groups. One big group, and mostly at the north of Israel, are wild grape varieties. Wild grape is actually the mother of grapevine. This is the plant that was later domesticated into what we know today as the domesticated grapevine. So these are usually grapevines growing wild on trees. They are climbers, and they have very, very small berries, very small clusters. In general, they are not used commercially. The other part are actually runaways. Runaways are domesticated grapevines, like could be any European variety even, that were for some reason forgotten in the wilds. Either it was grown there in ancient times and neglected, or it was carried out by someone and left in the wild. So they are actually domesticated varieties, but they are runaways. So starting with the characterizing the traditional grape populations, we started by a very beautiful collection in the Sataf near Jerusalem on the Jerusalem mountains. Sataf is managed by the JNF Kakal for many, many years. This is part of a very big collection of Israeli species, local indigenous species, and the grapevine, of course, is a very important one. So we helped for several years this collection get better results for grape growing. Indeed, we found there 24 different traditional varieties. Most of them are actually considered table grapes. The second thing, of course, is because 24 varieties, which most of our table grapes is not enough. So we decided going out into the wilds. This is a picture of my at 2012. You can see us collecting grapes to produce wines from the wilds. And we found in many, many areas of Israel, very, very interesting grape varieties like the one we call Yael. Today, this is a black grape variety that has beautiful clusters, very, very similar to the ones you can find on Shiraz variety, or the variety called Bustan, which is very similar to grapes you can find on Chardonnay vines. So these are indeed not table grapes, and these are actually wine grapes. And the reason they were actually neglected is probably because they had no use, because the Arab population does not produce wine due to the prohibition of wine consumption by their religion. So these were actually neglected. No one actually bothered growing them anymore. So indeed, we find these grape varieties. In this case, we found them on the coast, of the south part of the coastal area of Israel. You can see here that sometimes we are actually risking our lives going into cactuses and taking out grape varieties, or getting stuck with our Jeep in the sands during a survey. So this is indeed not always very easy. In general, we can say that we found two main big grapevine population. One is what we call the sativa, or the domesticated grapevines. We found a lot of them in the wilds, and they are characterized by a flower that has both male and female organs in the same flower. So the flower can actually, each flower can actually fertilize itself, and they are very, they have big berries and big clusters for that reason. On the other hand, the wild grapevines have either male, in this case, or female flowers. So each plant is either a male or female. Of course, only the female plants will have any kind of fruit. So the male plants might seem to us as barren or sterile, but they are actually male. They just produce the pollen, and the female plants actually carry the berries. So we found these two very interesting populations. Now, out of the domesticated feral grapevines we found a big amount of 400 different grapevines in the wilds. We found, after genetic analysis, fingerprinting these varieties and checking them against a very big population of European and American varieties, we found in our collection 82 unique varieties that are indigenous to Israel and are not found in any other part of the world, which is a big amount, much more than we thought initially that we will actually find. Here you can see the map of the Israeli grapevine collection. You can see that we started doing a lot of work in the northern part of Israel, where the wild grapevines are starred by a star, yellow star. And the domesticated vines, the feral grapevines that were neglected in the wilds, you can see in red dots all around Israel, while the wild grapevines are located only in the northern part of Israel. So the domesticated grapevines are probably much more interesting to growers, and they are probably also much more resistant to drought and salinity. This is why we can actually find them in very remote and very dry and arid areas like the desert of the Negev near Sde Boker, and even south as the border of the Israeli-Egyptian border, in areas of 50 to 100 millimeters of rain per year. So that's a very, very small amount of water. And these grapevines actually survive in these very harsh conditions, making them probably a very resilient, very stress-resistant varieties, which is a very interesting fact. So this is the map. You can see big work done here. Many of these collected grape varieties were planted in a collection, in a rescue collection. Why do we call it a rescue collection? I will say in a minute, but this is a rescue collection in Ariel University, in the city of Ariel, actually, which is located in the middle of the Shomron area. And the reason we call it a rescue collection is because many of these varieties that we collect today will not be there in another year. The reason is the very strong and very fast urbanization processes happening in Israel. And just as an example, I can tell you that we were collecting grape samples from the junction of Margaliot in the north. And a year later, when we came to pick some canes for propagating and putting it into the collection, it was not there anymore because the junction was expanded and they just destroyed the grapes, and we don't have these varieties anymore. So indeed, this is a race against time to collect the grape genetic resources wherever we can actually put our hands on them. Here you can see beautiful terraces built near Ariel University, where just below the dormitories. It's a beautiful spot. You can come and visit it. It's already planted with vines, and it's a very interesting vineyard that can teach us a lot about how can we grow on terraces in Israel and modern methods. So I want now to show you just a few grape varieties that we collected in our survey. We already spoke about the Yael. You can see it here growing already in our collection. Very beautiful grape bunches. These are all black varieties, of course. We give names many times to remind us of the places we actually collected this variety initially. So Tuba is near the kibbutz Tuba, bigger bunches but very small berries. Misla is from a place called En Misla. Again, very beautiful clusters and medium-sized berries. The Marwani is a small cluster with bigger berries, but they contain a huge amount of color and polyphenols, which we'll be talking about later. This is one of the wild grapevines. We call it Pumela because we found it in a Pumela orchard. So it's a beautiful small clustered berries and small berries, black and very, very concentrated with color. This is a variety called Bituni. It's already used for very small amounts for winemaking in Israel now. This is a very big bunched grapevine called Tufahi. So when we produce wines out of these varieties, first of all, we want to see that it has sufficient alcohol levels. So you can see that some varieties have better alcohol levels, some have quite minor or lower alcohol levels, like the Zaytuni here has only 11%. That's not enough to produce good red wines. But if we look at Marwani or Tuba, we can see very good alcohol levels. These specific varieties have also very good acid levels and high colors and polyphenol level, which is a very, very important factor when trying to produce red wine. So indeed, we can say that a few of these varieties can actually produce modern quality red wines, which can make wines in any modern winery. We actually found many more white grape varieties than reds. That's an interesting fact by itself. Why so many white varieties were grown in Israel? Anyway, we gave them some very nice names. So we have the Bustan, the Ramtania, Be'er, and Dumiat. These are just examples out of many, many others. Now, the Be'er variety is a very, very interesting one. First of all, it makes beautiful wines. Secondly, it has very small berries, and it's really a classical wine grape. When we talk about the wine grape opposing a table grape, the table grapes usually have bigger berries. They have thinner skins. You don't like to chew a lot on a table grape. It usually will not have a very high sugar levels. The acid is not very important. We don't want it to be too tart. And the bunch should be beautiful. On the other hand, the wine grapes, we usually like them to be small, berried, small clusters, concentrate the flavors and the colors which are usually in the skin. So generally, when we see a variety with very small clusters, very small berries, it's considered as a wine grape. So the Be'er is actually also morphologically looks like a wine grape, but more importantly, and I will skip to this slide, this Be'er was tested with many other varieties out of our collection to find if any of these varieties are actually resistant to powdery mildew. Powdery mildew is probably the most difficult disease that grapevine encounters. It looks like some kind of flour powder on the leaves, and it actually kills the leaves after some time. You can see here what happens if we inoculate disc leaves with conidia, or the essence of this powdery mildew, and you can see that after a week or a few days, they become black and die. Now the Be'er, you can see here, which is very interesting, did not have any signs of powdery mildew after 2 weeks. It's almost totally resistant to this disease, which is a very, very important attribute that gives this variety a lot of interest. Another thing important, we don't have to understand everything that is you see here. This is an aromatic profile done in a collaboration with Susan Ebler, Professor Susan Ebler for UC Davis. You can see here that these are all aromatic compounds we can actually notice and we can sense by our nose or by a machine. And these here on the bottom are actually the grape varieties we tested. You can see that a few of these varieties, like this one here, have very unique aromatic profiles. These are local varieties we found, and these are probably very, very aromatic, very floral aromas coming from a big bunch of very floral aromatic compounds. So this is a very good indication of the uses that we can later on give these varieties specific treatment and ferment them towards aromatic varieties and aromatic wines. Okay, so we have this big collection. We collected it, and we are identifying which of these varieties are possible, are actually good for winemaking in modern times. But how do we identify the varieties that were used for wine production in ancient times? This is a big question. And there are a few approaches we are using to address this huge question, which is really time consuming, and it will take us probably maybe a lifetime to solve all of this question. So the first approach is historical. And we, with the help of Professor Zohar Amar from Ariel University, we studied the scripts and the ancient books for any kind of reference to wines. And we found out that mostly wine varieties were not named. In general, they could talk about red wines or white wines, ancient or old wines and new wines. And many times they gave the name not to the variety, but actually to the wine by its place, like Yain Shomroni or Yain Carmeli, and so on. Where is the place it was produced? But not as it's today, we usually call it by the initial variety that was used to produce the wine. So that makes a big problem for us because we cannot historically understand which varieties were used. Except one place where it's possible that they actually refer to two varieties. And this comes from the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, in Masechet Shabbat. And I translated it to English in my free translation. It says like this: said Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav, the people of Jerusalem were vain people. A man would ask his friend, how did you dine today? Did you have a soft bread or a hard bread? Gordali wine or chardali wine? In a wide dining sofa or a narrow one? So what are they talking about? What is this story telling us? So Rav Chizda said, what Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav is saying here is that this is all hidden meaning for prostitution. These people were morally broken. They were talking and interested only in, I can't say it in any softer words, in sex. So they were just talking about that and giving examples from different wines or soft bread or hard bread and so on. So Gordali wine and Chardali wine are kinds of wines, probably, that have very different characteristics. And we will talk about that in a few seconds. So what is Gordali and Chardali? How does that say anything about the woman that guy was joining last night? So what Rabbi Menachem di Lunzano, he lived around the 16th century in Jerusalem. So he says that's very easy. I can solve your question very easily. Up to this day, there are two sorts of wine in Jerusalem, Jindali and Hamdani wines. He says that this is the Gordali and Chardali that the Talmud is referring to. The Jindali grapes are soft to chew and the wine weak, representing a married woman. And the Hamdani grapes are hard to chew and their wine strong, representing a virgin. So he actually says that these two varieties make very, very they are made of two very clear varieties, and they have very specific characteristics, where the Jindali has a weak wine, and the Hamdani had hard grapes that are harder to chew, and their wine is strong. So we went on and we found actually the Jindali and Hamdani grape varieties. We had them in the collection, and we were really amazed that they are really ancient varieties, and they were referred to so many years ago. And we went to check if these varieties indeed produce soft wines or hard wines. So we produced wines of these two varieties, and indeed, the Jindali has much weaker wine, and it has very soft skins. And the Jindali has much harder skins and produces much heavier and more alcoholic wines. So indeed, these two varieties, we have them in the collection, and they were referred to. We don't actually know for certain, but for sure they were there at the 16th century, and perhaps they were there even at the Second Temple's time. So this is two white varieties that are really, really ancient for sure. This is the only serious reference we found to ancient grape varieties. But out of our story coming out in a lot of media, it was published at the first page of the New York Times, and then a big piece about it in CNN a few years back. That made a lot of wineries in Israel want to connect to this story And you can see already a few wineries, and every year this grows. I'm not sure I will have in a few years space for other wines that are already produced in Israel from these ancient varieties. You can see here the Marawi, which is also Hamdani called, the Bituni from Rekanat. You can see Feldstein producing a few wines from ancient varieties. The Kremizan winery, which was actually the pioneer one. It's a non-kosher winery in the Palestinian area. Gvaot winery, which is my own winery, produces Jandali and Hamdani, and also for a few years Bituni. And Tepperberg is a lot into Debuki, and Barkan winery produces Jandali and Hamdani. So a lot of wineries are into it because of the connection, because of the story. So the question is, and this is a big question, it's not just practical, it's a basic science question in a way, but it's very interesting. What is the origin of our varieties? Most varieties in the world, today the theory says that they originated in the Caucasus area. And from that area, this is where the grape vanilla was actually domesticated and spread from this area all over the world. We wanted to check if our varieties are actually from the Caucasus area, or maybe they were actually originating from our wild grape population, which makes it a possibility that they were actually totally domesticated in this area without any influence. And here you can see a genetic analysis done in very advanced techniques. You can see here in light blue, you can see all of our local varieties clustering very closely to the ones in dark blue, which are actually our wild grapevines. This means that it's really possible that our domesticated grapevines that we found in our collection were actually domesticated in the land of Israel and did not immigrate from the Caucasus or from other areas. So this is a very interesting point, which we are now more deeply researching. Another approach that we are trying to use in order to understand actually the identity of the ancient grapes used for winemaking is by the archaeobotanical approach. We have, you know, that around Israel there are a lot of archaeological excavations, and I just give here examples of three. You can see here the Temple Mount. Of course, we do not dig inside the Temple Mount, but the Ophel at the south. Sorry, I have some background noise, people. So you can see here that at the south part of the Temple Mount, we had a very big fortress called the Ophel. And the Ophel was dug by Dr. Eilat Mazar, and she found very interesting grape remains there. Masada also is excavated for many years and also found very interesting grape remains. The ancient city of Shiloh, very near my own winery, has a lot of excavations in the recent years, and the archaeologists there they find every year grape remains. Usually they find grape seeds, as you can see here. Mostly they are charred, they are burned. This is why they survived for so many years. They were burned for some reason. It could be a big fire caused by natural causes, or it could be some kind of occupation that burned all of the buildings, and they collapsed and actually burned slowly and became coals. So this is one. This is the most abundant kind of findings we can find. Here you can see a very unique finding by Dr. Eilat Mazar in the Ophel. She found near these big wine vessels, she found grapes, real grapes, the whole berry, actually charred. And very near it, she found the most ancient script in ancient Hebrew saying Yain Chalak. Yain Chalak is smooth wine. We don't exactly understand what it means, but that it's quite clear that these grapes were used to produce wine in this very interesting fortress. So that's That's maybe one of the most ancient grape wine findings. This is more recent. We found a work of Dr. Roy Porat and Dr. Tziona Ben Gedalia in the Herodian Palace. You can see the Herodian Palace. It's a very interesting place to visit. And a few years back, he found actually a winery. First of all, he saw very big vessels, and he didn't know exactly what they are. And he called me to ask if I think it might be used for wine. And I said, you know what, let's just excavate, these big vessels, and let's see if we can find wine remains or grape remains inside. So we did that, and we found a big amount of grape seeds in very good conditions and dry conditions, not burned. Some of them you can see were squeezed. So they went through a wine press. This is why they look like someone squeezed them. And we also found a big amounts of resins and other compounds. And Dr. Tziona Ben Gedalia is now characterizing the recipe that was used by Herod to produce the wines in his own private winery in Herodian. So how do we identify the grape varieties out of these ancient seed remains? So one approach is the morphological or morphometric approach. We actually developed a very interesting method to identify the variety of a grape by the seed structure. So we can actually screen by 3D scanning with very powerful cameras. We can scan the seed, and by mathematical means, we can actually identify each variety by its very unique structure. So we can identify and separate between a Merlot and a Hadari variety by the structure. You can actually see intuitively that here it's very pointed, and the Merlot has a very wide ending of the seed. And there are many, many other differences that we can actually calculate. Finally, we also developed the possibility to not just identify fresh seeds, but also charred or burned seeds, which are the main amount of archaeological findings. So today we can actually identify in very, very high accuracy the variety of a burned seed, not just of a fresh seed, which actually opens the way for us to identify the ancient burned remains found in so many excavations. Some of the findings, the grape findings, are actually not burned. They're many times dry, like the ones we found in Timna at the copper mines of King Solomon. In this case, Erez Ben Porat, the archaeologist there, called me and he said, look, I think that we have very, very good preservation of the material. So we took it and we opened the grape seed, which looks like this, in electron microscope. We started to scan it deeply and deeper and deeper. So first of all, you can see that inside a grape seed, we found a big amount of tissue, which is still intact. This is really unique. And when zooming in, you can actually see the structure of the cells still kept in a very nice order. Looking deeper in, you can actually see that some of the cells still have their inner part intact, like a small balloon you can see here. And even the connection between the cells are still intact. You can see here in a bigger magnification, the balloon of the inner side of the cell, where we have possibly very good amount of DNA. And that made us think maybe we can actually extract DNA out of these samples and actually sequence it and identify the variety by the sequence of the DNA. Now, this is not very simple to do, because deep sequencing of archaeological or aDNA is very, very problematic, because the DNA accumulates a lot of errors during the history, during time when it's laid out in the rain and the dust and the wind and the heat. It accumulates a lot of mistakes, a lot of errors. So it's very, very difficult to actually extract it, first of all, and then sequence it. We are using very powerful bioinformatic tools and bioinformatic analysis. And we are in the middle of identifying possibly some of the ancient remains coming from Timna. In other places, we found very good tissues inside the grape seeds. So in a few months or maybe a year, we hope to have answers as to the identity of these grape remains. Now, another very important project is to actually take the grapes found in our collection, which are possible wine varieties, and to actually make them available for the Israeli wine industry. And in that process, we have to clean them out of the viruses they accumulated during their stay in the wild. Now, the grapevine viruses are not as bad as the corona, and we don't have all of us to go into isolation for them, but the grapevines are not allowed to go into any commercial nursery unless they are totally clean of viruses. So for doing that, we had to develop the system to clean these varieties out of viruses. You can see what a virus can cause on a grapevine. You can see this is a normal grape bunch, and this is what happens when the grapevine is infected by viruses. It does not accumulate the same amount of color, and the bunch is many times smaller and thinner, and even in white varieties, it has a very high impact on the yield. So we don't like to have any viruses in our new established grape varieties. So in order to do a cleaning of a grape variety, we need actually to excise a very, very small part of the shoot tip of the grape. Why do we do that? Because the viruses usually do not get to the total head of the plant. It actually does not get there so fast. So if we can take the very, very smaller upper part, less than 0.5 millimeter, and grow it very fast in tissue culture, we might get a clean plant. What we actually developed in our method, we can accelerate the growth of the grapevine by putting it in dark. You know that when you put a seed in dark, it will grow very, very long stem. It will not just take out the green leaves. It will grow trying to get to the light. So using this, we try to run away from the virus by growing it in the dark. And we've got very, very good results with cleaning the virus from our varieties. You can see here a technician working and cleaning, taking the very, very small part of the upper part of the plant, putting it into tissue culture, growing it to have a few stems, and then transferring it into the final tube where it actually will grow roots, and then we can actually transfer it into a clean nursery to be grown to whole plants. This is what we have been doing for the last several years. We are still on the way. We do not have yet all of the answers, but I can say for granted that our research did a big step in helping the Israeli wine industry to find a unique story to connect to its wine roots and the traditions of wine in Israel. And hopefully in a few years, we will see many, many wineries adopting these varieties, producing wine from these ancient, beautiful varieties, and renewing the wines of the ancient kings of Israel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Really, it was fascinating and enjoyable. There are some questions on the chat. If anybody would like to just open this thing, Cynthia, would you like to ask a question personally?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yes, please. Cynthia, go ahead. Cynthia, we don't hear you, unfortunately. Try again. No, we don't have Cynthia coming through, but she has asked a question on the chat. Why don't wineries name the grape varieties of the wines they do? Why don't wineries name the
Well, actually, the group that develops a wine could be a breeding process or by just selecting it. They actually give the names usually. So I'm the guy, unfortunately, that have to give names. Yeah, a huge amount of names, so that's
You got to be creative and find good ones.
Yeah, we have to be very creative.
Hamdi and Shmamdi, it sounds so fascinating, honestly.
The Hamdani and Jandali are ancient names. They're traditional names, so we did not give them. But the ones that we find, we can call them Bustan or Yael or Hebrew names that give some interesting, either about the place we found them or other things.
Wonderful. Does anybody else have a
I
question?
I have two
Yeah, one
questions,
at a time.
please.
Stanley, first. Go, Stanley.
Okay. You mentioned a lot of the varieties in the grapes. One gives mildew resistance, and another one gives high alcohol. Is there a way that you can use genetic engineering to combine the qualities you want and get a sort of a wine that gives you the better quality?
It's of course it's possible, but unfortunately, the grape wine industry is very traditional, and they do not accept any genetic engineering of any kind. So the only means we can actually transfer genes or transfer characteristics from one plant to another is by breeding, is crossing them, and by traditional methods, and not by genetic engineering. So this is something we started doing last year, trying to cross some of our local varieties, which have very interesting attributes, with actually European varieties that have beautiful wine characteristics, trying to combine the strong suits of both.
Thanks.
Thank you, Stanley. Somebody else wanted to ask a
Yes,
question?
I want to ask two questions, please.
Yes, please say your name. Who's I? Welcome.
Marian.
Hello, Marian. Hello, Marian. Yes, please go ahead.
First of all, I'm absolutely intrigued by this subject. I nearly didn't watch, but I'm so pleased that I did.
Thank you.
Now, is it possible to visit the center? I mean, I don't mean now during Corona, but at some stage, is it possible to visit? Is there actually a visitor center in existence now before the new building is built? Second question doesn't really have anything to do with Israeli wine, but it's a question I've had for a while. In the Siddur, in the Shabbat service, they mentioned Cyprus wine. And I'm wondering if there's some kind of a connection. What kind of grapes were in Cyprus that would have been made into wine, presumably by Jews, and used in the temple in Jerusalem? I wonder if you know anything about that.
So about the first question, which is a technical question in nature, I can say that for now we do not normally have visits. First of all, because of Corona, but even in normal times, we do have it through Adrian and the other guys, but it's usually very limited because we don't have the facilities today to actually have a big amount of visitors. But yes, indeed, if a group will be organized, we can do something about it. Now, about the Cyprus wine, Yen Kafrisin is mentioned in the Siddur, as you said, and one of the main questions is it a variety or is it a style of wine? We believe, or at least I do believe, and that this is a style of wine. If you visit Cyprus, you will see that they have a very unique style of wine called Commanderia. They actually partially dry the grapes on the vineyard, and kind of rugs on the vineyard, and they make it very, very sweet by this partial drying. Then they produce wines that are actually kind of natural port wines. They have very high sugar levels and very high alcohol levels. So this kind of wine maybe is the reason for why they wanted to actually dilute the wine a few times in water, because it was very, very very tense, very high alcoholic and very sweet. And we believe that maybe the Yen Kafrisin that is mentioned in the Ktoret production is this kind of high alcoholic wine that was maybe used to extract the aromas out of the ingredients of the Ktoret. So that might be the reason. And we can see that if you don't have Yem Kafresin, you bring a white ancient wine. So it was probably something that resembles very ancient dry white wine. So it was probably used to extract the essence of these ingredients.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And I look forward to visiting when I can.
By all means.
We all do.
I'm trying to read the questions in the chat. I'm wondering about the endemic grape varieties. Do you analyze the quality of the juice and yield? I ask because I am a archaeologist who wants to construct ancient wine production in the Shefela. Yes, indeed. This is what I said. We actually analyze the quality of the juice and the yield every year. We cannot do it on all of the collection every year, but you try to move through a few varieties that show more potential. So we do that every year for a few varieties, and indeed we have some very interesting results from that. Another question is, was it hard sell to get the traditional Israeli commercial wineries to use these varieties? Well, we are not trying to persuade them. They are actually trying to get them as soon as possible. Not all of them believe in that. Some of them believe that Israel should produce the best wines from European varieties and don't touch at all any traditional varieties. Others are sure that the only way to go around this is to produce wines from ancient varieties. So, there are a lot of opinions on that, but some of them are really, really enthusiastic, and it's not a hard sell at all. Another question.
I have a question, if I may. I wanted to ask you, where is Givot and where we can buy your wine? And you can answer that, and then I can ask the other question.
The Goat Winery is located in Givat Harel near Shiloh, and it's sold all over Israel and in the States. I'm not sure we are still in South Africa, but in the States for sure, England, all around. It's a prize-winning winery, and I'm very proud of it.
Well, we're looking forward to tasting it. And the second question I wanted to ask, because in wine production, I understand that the grape seed produces oils. Have you guys ever investigated the different kinds of oils that would have come from the different strains?
Not yet, but we are starting now to investigate into compounds coming from various parts, including the leaves and the pomace, which is the leftover of the wine industry, finding very interesting health compounds in these varieties, which might be used later on. We don't have the time to talk about it, but might be used for various applications in healthcare, or at least as a supplementary.
Okay, interesting. Do you want to read? There are some other questions.
What's your favorite wine made of a traditional variety? Well, I really, really like the Bituni, red, elegant, very light colored, very similar to Pinot Noir. We call it the Israeli Pinot Noir. It's a beautiful grape, even though it doesn't look like much when you start with it. When you produce the wine, you get so floral aromas and very fruity aromas, and it's a very elegant and sophisticated wine in a way. We don't know how it will evolve, how it will age, but for now, it seems like a beautiful red wine for the Israeli hot summer. It's not a heavy red, it's like a very lighter red, and it makes a beautiful drink, so I really like this variety. Where can I find a list of Israeli wines and where they can be bought? Well, there are a few sites that actually accumulate this knowledge. There's Israel Wines. You can go into it and you can find a lot of that. There are a few commercial sites where you can find like Neko and the others. It's Wine Depot in Israel. You can find a lot of the wineries and Israeli wines in there with a lot of information and wine tastings, and you can see whatever you can see there, and you can order online. So by all means, drink Israeli wine.
Thank you for that. Anyway, does anybody else have a question? Kathleen, you're very quiet after the fact.
Thanks, Professor. Thank you so much. I am just wondering if you might, in your archaeological background, offer me your opinion. There's some theory that a lot of the very famous wines, including the Cananau and the Naragas, came actually from Israel to the western part of the Mediterranean. And I'm just wondering if you think that really some of these endemic wine grapes that you're finding might actually be the ancestral origins of those.
So actually, we are just publishing a paper that shows that the grandfather or grandmother of the Chardonnay grape originated from Israel. And it's a very interesting fact. The Chardonnay itself had a very interesting myth, saying that the name Chardonnay comes from the word Shar Adonai, and it came from Israel during the Templar, whatever they did here, part of killing Jews. So that's not right. We know that the Chardonnay is a breeding done in France, but one of its father came from Eastern countries, probably in the Balkan, and its origin of one of the grandfather or grandmother of this plant were quite certainly one of our white varieties found in the north. So, and that meaning, you can say that they were probably bred, including some of our genetic background, but they are not exactly the ones that were originating in Israel. Okay.
Any more questions? Out of all the wines you know, what do you think the best wine to drink is in terms of a red wine and in terms of a white wine, kosher Israeli wines, or the ones that you produce?
Well, that's a big question. I can say in general that the Petit Verdot is becoming a very central variety in Israel. It makes beautiful, very dark colored wines with some beautiful aromas of raspberry and black fruit, some floral notes. And this is becoming a major variety in Israel that look forward to enhancing. And I can tell you that in my winery, we are aiming towards 30% of Petit Verdot in our production, which is a huge amount. So this is an interesting drink. Also of that, I believe that today you can find so many different characteristics of wine, so many different wine styles in Israel, that it's very, very hard to answer this question in a general scope. So each of you need to find their own kind of style. Take to a few wineries that produce wines that they are actually enjoying to drink, not just enjoying to show the bottle, but actually enjoy the drink. Red wine is generally considered more healthy than the white wines because it contains much higher amounts of polyphenols and color materials, which are better for our health. They also contain bigger amounts of resveratrol, which is considered a rejuvenating compound. So indeed, red wines are probably better for our health, but consume wine in small amounts. Don't overdo it. Okay.
Somebody's asking a question, and I think it's referring to the wine that you mentioned before. Please send us the name of the wine so we can enjoy the next lockdown. And then another one wrote, Ech kotvim et hayain.
I'm not quite sure about this question.
Can you clarify your questions, guys? Ech kotvim et hayain. What are you asking?
How do you cut? How do you?
Can you write down the name of the one
Anna,
mentioned?
can you mention again the one you mentioned before of the question I asked you? What do you think's the best? Something with a V.
The petit verdot.
Verdot.
Verdot. Petit verdot. It's written in English with a T at the end. Verdot. Petit verdot. I don't know why the French always write many more letters than are actually used to talk about.
That's true.
This is the way. Names of wines, again, I'm not sure how to do that, but for sure you can go into any bigger wine site in Israel that sells wine, and you will find the whole list. I think that's the main way to actually do that. Okay, people.
Thank you so much. It was most enjoyable and fascinating, and we thank you so much for giving of your time and the partnership with the university. Until the next time, thank you again. Really, it was fascinating and enjoyable.
Thank you, everyone, for participating. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. If anybody else would like to volunteer, please be in touch with Aviva. Her email is on the screen as we speak, or via the Telfed. You're welcome to be in touch with her. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I just would like to remind you that we have another joint venture with the Ariel University on next Tuesday, the 17th, Nutrition Myth Debunked, with Professor Mona Boaz and Dr. Vered Kaufman. Invite you all to join us and enjoy. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the day. Kathleen, if you'd like to be a volunteer, we'd be happy to hear from you too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.